You may have seen an influx of content lately about how Russia is on the verge of a banking crisis. Specifically, that banks have been quietly subsidizing the Russian war machine now for the past 2 years, both saddling those banks with risky assets and also putting the Russian war economy on an unsustainable trajectory. Well, today is going to be a bit of a meta discussion, because we need to talk about the origin of this theory, why it would not be surprising if Russia pursued this funding strategy, despite the issues that I am going to raise in the first bit. And then we will talk about how exactly the Russian economy could fall apart due to all of this. And, as ever, all of these things are complicated. Let's start with the origin of the discussion. It all traces back to this Substack post called Russia's Hidden War Debt, published on January 11th. The basic argument is that the Kremlin has forced major Russian banks to issue loans to the war industry at under-market rates, to the tune of $210 to $250 billion. These contractors are credit risks, meaning that the Kremlin has shifted a large portion of the implicit cost of the war away from the federal budget and to privately owned banks. This has a ton of implications about the sustainability of the war, which we will get to later. For now, I want to focus on the Substack post and have a meta conversation about its dissemination. Now, I saw the post on January 11th, the day that it came out, and I also thought it had a very interesting claim. Moreover, I had a long flight the next day. One of the things that I prepared to do on the plane was to write a script for a video that would go in depth on the subject. But I stopped outlining after about 10 minutes. Why, you may ask? Because this is not a report. It is an executive summary of a report that, at the time of this writing, has not yet come out. And until there is an actual report, we cannot really engage with the claims that are being made. In the interim, though, this thing has snowballed, getting quite a bit of media attention. 28 articles by one well-grounded measure. And within those articles, it is tending to be presented as a report, which, again, it is not. It is a Substack post that is an executive summary of a report. It also caught quite a following on Western social media because, well, not surprisingly, it is intriguing and would be bad news for Russia. Now, I, for one, am very interested in reading more about it. I am also interested in seeing what others make of how the report was constructed. For now, though, I think it would be best if the media ecosphere reined it in a bit. Oh, also, I would be shocked if Western intelligence did not know all of this already. So while it is very interesting for us in the open source circles to discuss it, we keyboard warriors should always be humble and cleanse ourselves of the notion that we found the one true secret of the war. The fact is, we are usually 8 steps behind what is being discussed in the inner sanctum. You know, I want to go back to those 28 articles for a second. It is a decent chunk of the media ecosphere, and it was a problem across the political spectrum, with some coverage coming from each of the ideological wings. But the upshot is that only a handful of major outlets covered it, and the distribution was not as massive as, say, 200-something sources. That is how many covered Trump's comments during his inauguration, that Putin was destroying Russia. It also does not touch the 300-something sources covering Trump's appointment of Keith Kellogg as special envoy to Ukraine. Start reading those articles now, because we are going to be hearing a lot about him soon. Anyway, how do I know all of this? Well, it is thanks to today's returning sponsor, Ground News. Did you catch that well-grounded pun from earlier? Regardless, Ground News has you covered with its Vantage plan, which is how I stay up to date with what is going on out in the world. And with my special link, ground.news/linesonmaps, you can get a steep discount and stay informed, all while supporting this channel. Isn't that great? What is also great is the analysis that you are about to get on why Russia might pursue such a strategy, because even if we cannot yet evaluate the report, we can still discuss why Russia's alleged methods would be a plausible choice. The knee-jerk answer is obviously The war is expensive, and so more funding is better than less. The banking sector has a lot of money, so soaking them is not a bad idea. And no, there is nothing wrong with that take, but there are a couple of subtleties here too. One is signaling to the opposing Western coalition. I think I have spilt enough digital ink telling you that, in bargaining, convincing your opponent that you are strong is almost as important as actually being strong. Well, if Russia can continue the war to the degree that we have seen, while only spending about 6.3% of GDP on defense, think about what would happen if Russia really bore down. For a comparison, the United States spent about 40% of GDP on its military at the peak of World War II. Whereas the West has learned to ignore Russia's alleged red lines, actual movement of the front lines, with only a modest military investment, speaks volumes. Remember, don't listen to what leaders say, watch what they do, and this is a lot of doing. Of course, there are questions about the physical toll of the war on Russia. But the point here is that the Kremlin wants to promote the idea that it is capable of pushing a lot harder, regardless of the truth. Then again, I should circle back to the caveat about intelligence. This operation might have flown under the public's radar for a while, but it ought not go 2 years without setting off some alarm bells inside of Langley. Understanding how Russia's war machine works is a top priority there. So, once more, this almost certainly has already been priced into how Western governments have been reacting to the war for a long time now. The other benefit is what goes on inside of Russia. Inflation can be self-reinforcing. That is, expectations that prices will rise can cause prices to rise, as consumers rush to stores to make purchases before everything costs more. But that increases demand, and so prices go up. In that light, public defense spending is a public metric. It may very well be suppressed behind closed doors to some degree, but whatever hedging or obfuscating goes on there ultimately gives way to some number. So the lower that you can make that number, the more that you mitigate inflation fears. The end result is less panic buying. And you can see where this is an active problem for Russia right now. Reports indicate a growing unease within the Kremlin about the Russian economy. To fight inflation, the central bank has increased interest rates. But higher interest rates mean less investment, and that is going to reduce the long-term quantities of consumer goods available, thus the need to hide inflation. Of course, this is no silver bullet. In the long run, consumers are going to feel how abundant rubles are in the economy, and that is going to increase inflation one way or another. Meat prices are going to go up, same with produce, and let's not even begin to discuss eggs. But if you are the Kremlin, the longer that you can delay it, the better. As for where this creates problems for Russian economic stability, the answers there again are subtle. It is tempting to default to a headline problem that risky loans risk bankrupting banks, and that would cause the entire sector to melt down. Those of us who have lived through the Great Recession understand the basics of that problem well. I feel like he is pointing to me right now. But that ignores what the Russian government can do to mitigate the problem, and Russia has a fantastic head of the central bank. It seems like 2025 is going to be the year of Elvira Nabiulina, for better or for worse for Russia. Indeed, ignoring Russia's agency on this front has been one of the central fallacies in Western analysis of the war. I am sure that you have heard it 100 times. Do this simple step, and Russia will be bankrupt in 6 months. Well, yes, if Russia continues to do exactly the same thing, and ignores the simple step that you have taken. However, Russia is a strategic actor, and will adapt to the circumstances placed in front of it. Sometimes it takes a bit, but eventually the information filters up, and the Kremlin reacts. Now, some interventions will not be necessary. If a loan or two goes belly up, a single bank might not be in financial danger, nor will it pose domino problems to the sector. The bank will just have to absorb the loss, and the Kremlin can smile as it successfully shifted some portion of the cost of war to private banks. Not too long ago, we discussed how the real losers of the war currently are Russia's oligarchs. Well, this is just another way that they are paying the price. Where things get more interesting is with bigger losses, the types that the banks cannot absorb on their own. Absent a government intervention, this is where the economy can fall apart. Again, think back to the Great Recession. But even with a government intervention, the Kremlin still comes out ahead here. It essentially received an interest-free loan in the affair. The banks acted as a silent creditor to the government. It is not a great outcome for the Kremlin, but it is still better than fronting the costs of war from the start. The real problem is the meta problem. No, I am not talking about this guy. I am referring to if Russians become worried about the stability of the banking sector and initiate a bank run, either because they do not trust the Kremlin to make the banks whole, or they think that the whole process will take too long. Then you have a systemic problem on your hands once again. And the perverse thing about a bank run is that there need not be any fundamental problems with the sector for one to start. Consider this. Imagine that everyone else is withdrawing their funds. Generally speaking, banks do not have enough liquidity to pay everyone at once. I do not want to be the one left holding the bag, and so I too race to withdraw my funds. But that justifies everyone else's decision to withdraw their funds, and thus the cycle begins anew. It is a self-reinforcing behavior, which again gives the Kremlin all the reason in the world to stay silent about this alternative funding strategy. To repeat, governments can take measures to mitigate such a problem, and Russia is no different. They certainly are going to try to ensure those deposits, just as the FDIC does in the United States. By doing so, depositors will eventually get their money from the government, even if the bank cannot pay them. They can place caps on withdrawals to limit the total money removed. They can raise interest rates to incentivize people to not touch their funds, though Russia is maxing out on that strategy already. But all of those distort the banking sector in some other way, and thus are not free solutions. As a final note, this system creates a further problem with ending the war. A risky loan can still pay off for the bank, as long as the business stays afloat. However, once the war ends, all of those manufacturers are going to go out of business. At that point, the Kremlin will have to step in to rescue the banking sector. Looking at the flow of payments, it is not an impossible problem. It will essentially be cutting out the middleman of the payment system. But it also does not make the post-war situation look very good for Moscow. Add that to the list of difficult but not impossible peacetime challenges that we have covered before. Meanwhile, what is an impossible problem is how to decide between two excellent books about the war. I guess you will have to just read both of them. Check the video description for more information about those two. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.